Have a seat. We're going to get restarted so we can start catching up in terms of time. As you are probably well aware, research is at the core of our mission and our activities. We try to keep it as connected as possible to the clinical side. And we are well known for our strong and ongoing efforts in the clinical research in particular. So I would like to introduce Cassie, Everson, who's a member of our research coordinator team, who's going to do a review for us as to all of the different aspects of research participation. And hopefully we could get you a little more pumped up about signing up for studies. Cassie?
Hi, everybody. I'm Cassie Everson, for those of you who don't know me, and as Dr. Milla said, I'm one of the research coordinators, and today I'm going to be talking about more information on research participation. So today I'm just going to be I'm going to do some staff introductions. I'm also going to give more information about what research coordinators do, some of our general responsibilities. I'm also going to talk about how we determine if a patient is eligible for a research study. And I'm going to talk about why it's so important for people to participate in research. And then I'll also cover what some of the responsibilities are that come along with participating in research and why people do choose to participate in research studies. And then I'll also give some general study information. And then if you're really jazzed and interested in learning more about research, I'll give some information on that as well. And I just want to make a special note that this talk is more about general research information, so it's not really for specific research studies. So if you have any of those specific research questions, please visit our research table over here, or you can call us at 650-736-0388, and we can answer any questions you might have. So I will first introduce Ms. Zoe Davies, who is also a nurse practitioner as well as a research coordinator, and she has been here the longest. She's been here since 1993, and not only is she a research coordinator, but she also works on the Advanced Diagnostic Clinic, which helps to diagnose or not diagnose patients with cystic fibrosis. And she mostly works on industry-sponsored studies, which are studies where a pharmaceutical company basically oversees and funds the studies. An example of that would be Vertex. Here we have Jacqueline Zerbies, who is also a nurse practitioner, and she's been here at Stanford for about 6 years. She has 20 years of experience in research, however, prior to coming to Stanford. And she also works on the Advanced Diagnostic Clinic, and she also coordinates the CF newborn screening program here at Stanford. And Jackie works mostly on both industry-sponsored studies and investigator-initiated studies. And investigator-initiated studies are when a physician has a particular interest and they come up with a study. And an example of that would be Dr. Conrad's NAC study. So further, I want to introduce Ms. Colleen Dunn, who is also a respiratory therapist as well as a research coordinator. And she's been here at Stanford for a very long time, but she's been in research for about 14 years. And her job is also to come up to work on the studies and get them up and running, as well as work on the budgets for the studies. And she also works on both industry-sponsored as well as investigator-initiated studies. And then here I am, and I've been here for 3.5 years working in research, and I work on both of those kinds of studies as well. So there are some other staff members that we have on our team that you may not always see, but they're working behind the scenes very hard nonetheless. So I first want to introduce Miss Angie, and she's our Regulatory Affairs Coordinator, and she basically works on the IRB regulatory paperwork as well as drafting patient consent forms, and she's also in charge of preparing clinical study budgets alongside Colleen. Kathy Hernandez is our database specialist, and her primary responsibility is to enter data into our CF registry database, and what she'll do also is she comes around to the clinics and she'll consent patients for that registry. So if you haven't met her already, you will at some point. She's also in charge of managing our website, and when we have studies that we get and we need queries, she performs those for us as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then this is Alex, our newest addition to our research team, and he is our research assistant. He works in the lab, and what he does is he processes the specimens that we collect at study visits. So I just wanted to quickly cover just some of the general responsibilities that we have. Some administrative tasks that we might do day to day would be educating some of the staff about the protocol as well as documenting study visits. Some of the subject-oriented tasks might include screening subjects for a particular study or ensuring that the tests that we're running are accurate. And one of the most important job functions that we have also is performing the informed consent. And all throughout the whole time that a patient is in a study, we really strive to keep the patient safe and informed. It's very, very important to us that they know what's going on, they understand what's going on even prior to them coming into the study. And if anything changes during the study, we really make sure to make sure that they're informed throughout the whole entire time, because informed consent is a process. It's not something that just happens at one point in time. So in order for informed consent to occur, we have to basically figure out if a patient can participate in a research study. And in order to do that, this is how we determine if a patient is eligible. So first we get inclusion and exclusion criteria. And basically what that is it's very protocol specific, so it's different for every different study. And basically, there are parameters that define who can participate in a research study. And examples of that would be perhaps FEV1, age, bugs that you grow out, lab results. So it just really depends on what study it is. And once we get that inclusion exclusion criteria, Kathy Hernandez runs a CF database query for us. And what that does is it really allows us to narrow down the pool to a more manageable number of patients instead of working with 350 patients or whatever. So that's really helpful. And then at that point, once we have a more manageable amount of patients, we can review the medical history, because the database is great. It's such a great resource, but it really is more for general things such as FEV1, age. And sometimes some of the inclusion or exclusion criteria might be very specific. So we have to kind of go and dig and investigate a little bit further just to really make sure that the patient does qualify. And throughout the entire time that a patient is in, that we're trying to figure out if they are eligible, we're always involving the clinical team. So we're talking to the physicians, we're talking to the nurse practitioners, so that everybody really is on board. It really is a group effort. And then once we determine they meet basic inclusion criteria, then we contact the patient. And we'll contact the patient a couple different ways. If they have an upcoming clinic appointment, we'll go to the clinic appointment and give them an informed consent and let them know what the study is about, the purpose, the procedures, any responsibilities that might come along with the study. If a patient doesn't have an upcoming clinic appointment, we'll give them a call and do the same exact thing, talk it through to them, and then we'll send them an informed consent so they're able to look at it, come up with questions they might have, talk with their spouse, talk with their kids, to really formulate any questions that anybody might have so that everybody's very comfortable with the research study. And then at a certain point, the patient has to either accept or decline participation. And if they accept, then they've signed the informed consent, and we move forward from there. If they decline, that's absolutely a patient's right, and their clinical care will not be impacted by that. But we just like to inquire as to why, because it might help us with the next patient. So why is research so important? Well, it's really important because it really does allow researchers to explore new ideas that they might have that really could lead to new treatments, or they could lead to a better quality of life in patients, which is so important. And not only does it give us a better understanding of cystic fibrosis, but it really does help the patients learn more about their disease and living with cystic fibrosis when they're in these research studies. And some of the studies, the visits are quite intensive. It is a lot of time, and a research coordinator is always there. And so it really is a one-on-one education. And we really, really, really do say, if you have questions, please let us know. And, we really encourage patients to ask any questions they have. So there are certain responsibilities that do come along with participating in research. So one of the first responsibility would be to be compliant. So if you're in a research study, it's really important that you're compliant, because say it's a medication study. If we're running all these tests with the assumption that you're, on the medication, then and if you're not taking it, then all the tests would be invalid. So it's really important that if you sign on, that you really are maintaining compliance throughout the entire time. And then there's also rules if you're in a study. So the rules change with every study, and they're different. So an example of a rule might be, for instance, you can't take hypertonic saline if you're in a certain study, but that would absolutely be something that we would talk to the patient about prior to coming in the study. We wouldn't enroll a patient and say, oh, by the way, you can't have hypertonic saline. Hope that's not an issue. It would definitely be something that we would cover before you're in, and you would be well aware of it. So, and that's just an example. So, and it really is to keep the patient safe, because there might be a drug interaction. So, they don't just come up with arbitrary rules. There is always a reason for everything. And then we also ask that the patients really do maintain close contact with not only your medical team, but also your research coordinator. So if you're in a study and you are having increased symptoms from your baseline, or you start a new medication, please, 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 maintain that close contact with us as well, because like I said before, we really, really want to keep everybody safe. So you're saying, gosh, there's all these rules. Like, why do people want to participate in research? And people do it for many different reasons. And basically, one of the reasons is they do it for the greater good of everybody, and they really want to help other people with cystic fibrosis, hopefully. Other patients do it because they want access to medications. And with that, I just want to really stress that it is still research. So just because you're in a research study doesn't mean that you're even going to get that drug. There's no guarantee, because if you're in a placebo-controlled study, which means you could either get drug or not get drug, so you might not be getting drug. And even if you do get drug, it might not work. So you just have to keep that in mind. It's still research, even though we do want you to participate. But and then, a lot of the research coordinators have been here for many, many years, as I previously stated. So, patients do really build relationships with the research coordinator. So sometimes patients really do see it as an opportunity to spend a little bit more quality time with their favorite research coordinators. And then I also just want to point this out. In our latest newsletter, which I have a copy of it right here, it's the winter 2014. One of our research patients wrote her perspective on why she participates in research. So please check that out. It's a really great read. So I just want to give some general study information. So patients and just people in general are always really interested about how people get compensated for participating in research studies. And basically, we compensate for time and inconvenience. We don't pay patients to just do research, because that would be unethical. We pay them for their time and their inconvenience. And then just depending on the sponsor of the study, we might reimburse for gas or travel, and we might reimburse for meals or lodging. And that would be something, if you're in one of those studies, we would talk to you about prior, so you would be informed of that. And then study visits occur at one of two locations, either at the CTRU, which is located at 800 Welch Road, which is this beautiful facility right here, or in the Pediatric Clinic Research Room, which is located at 770 Welch Road on the 3rd floor. And then I just want to say that there's free parking at both of those places, which is great, because parking is very hard to come by around here. And then you'll have the same team for both adults and pediatric sides. So if one of the research coordinators, all four of us, it'll be one of us at your study visit. So if you're saying to yourself, well, there's lots of rules, but it sounds really exciting, I want to participate, this is how you get more information. So this first link right here is just our general CF Center website, and I've clicked the tab right here that says research, and if you scroll down here to clinical trials, it should take you to a link that gives you more information about what we're doing here at Stanford. Or you can give us a call at 650-736-0388. If you're interested in maybe general information about what's going on nationwide, you can always go to clinicaltrials.gov, and that'll also have information about what we're doing here at Stanford. There's always information in our quarterly newsletter about research and what we're doing. And then this is kind of a snippet from the recent, I'm sorry, I don't know how I did that. From our recent newsletter, the winter 2014, and Dr. Moss did a nice write-up about the national conference that we attend, and then here in the corner is just current research studies that we do. And I also want to point out that if you didn't get a copy of your newsletter, we do mail them out, but if you didn't get a copy, they're always on our website under the CF News tab. And then if you're in clinic and you say to yourself, I have a research question, please let one of your clinical team know, and they'll give us a call, and if we're able to, we'll come over and answer any questions you might have. If we're not available for whatever reason, we'll get your information and we'll call you back, because we're always available for questions. So with that said, I just want to say thank you so much to all the patients and all the families for participating in research. We truly, truly could not do this without all of you. We really appreciate all of your help. So a monster big thank you. And then I also wanted to say thank you so much to the clinical staff as well. We really appreciate you being on our research team. Any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
I saw on the website that there is a study that's going to be opening soon for kids. I think it's age 6 and up. There may be 6 and to some age group with ivacaftor and VX661. And I'm wondering when that enrollment is going to start opening.
So, do you want to?
So I can answer that. So that study is currently on hold nationwide. So sorry.
Okay.
But if it comes back up, we'll do it. And so that's just, I don't think they've taken those links down just
I
yet.
see. Okay.
Sorry.
But if we do end up doing it and they're eligible, we'll give you a call. Any other questions? Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, Liz.
So if a patient is eligible for a particular trial, can they expect a phone call from you, or is this something that families need to be up and staying current with what's available?
So if a patient wants to give us a call, please feel free. But yeah, if a patient is eligible for a study, we will call them. That's how we do things here.
I'll just say this as for the people that are streaming. So Stanford does accept patients from other centers. So if you're on Ustream right now and you're interested in participating, I'll say that we always look at our own patients first. We want to serve our patient population, but currently there's several patients that are from different centers. So if you're interested, I get phone calls from all over the world. We don't bring them from other countries.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Cassie. That was a wonderful presentation. Now, another key component of our mission is the partnership that we established, and we're committed to keep going with our patients and families. So both on the adult and pediatric side, we have now long-standing advisory councils that help us see where is it that we need to go next to as a center, provide the best service that we can to our patients and families. So I'd like to invite Siri, Vaeth, and Brian Eddy, who are the chairs of the pediatric and adult advisory councils, to give us an update on what the councils are doing nowadays. And I'd like to put a word for both of them to encourage you to please participate, be engaged with them in whatever way possible, because we do need your input to get better.
Hello, everybody. Did I jump right in front of the adult advisory person? No. We're good? Okay. How's everybody doing? Quite frankly, it's like we never got out of high school. We had to sit on the fringes and in the back. Look at this little section here. We have to work on this. I'm Siri Vaeth. I am the lead parent for the Parent Advisory Council, and I have a daughter who is 19. She's actually just barely in the pediatrics now, but we have been seeing here at Stanford since she was diagnosed at 5 months. So we have a very long history with many people in the room. But I do see people here who I do not know, so I would love to know who here is attending because their child has CF. If you could just indicate. Oh, a lot, that's great. And if you could just tell me if your kids are under the age of 10, raise your hand. Okay. So we are a group of concerned parents whose children receive care from the CF Center, and we work in partnership with members of the care team. And I always stress every year that the key here is partnership. We are not coming with our list of things that we're irritated about, or the last clinic hospitalization or clinic visit, what thing we wanted to have resolved. We have a bigger picture for the clinic, and we are partners with the team. And we all have the shared goal to have the highest quality of service and care for our kids. Who are we specifically? You can see here the list of names, and there are 4 parents on this council, and Amy, Bob, if you'd want to wave your hands. There we go, there's Amy. You can stand up too. And Linda Burks is here, another parent on the council. Sandy Schumacher is not here. What to me is really exciting when you look at this list is the long list of names on the care team. And I will say we have wonderful participation from the care team. And I can tell you that I regularly stalk other CF Center websites to see what they're doing with their advisory councils. And we are doing a great job. We have wonderful activities here. And most importantly, we have this great participation from our team. Now, look at that photo, okay? Just to be clear, men are welcome. There may be all sorts of reasons, but you can do a historical analysis of advisory councils. You'll probably see heavily female. So is the care team here too, but for who participates. But I do want to put out a welcome invitation to men who would like to participate in this. Our council is different than maybe some other hospitals in that we work within the family-centered care department of the hospital. Lucille Packard its model is family-centered care with the belief that families will have better care if parents are involved in the process and seen as partners. And so as part of that, we have to go through the family-centered care department's training and screening and all those things to be on the council. Before I move on, I just want to stress life with CF is an ongoing balancing act. And I think it's something that there's so much science here today, but just for all of us to take a moment to really appreciate that most of the world outside these doors, what they don't get is that you never have a day without CF, whether you are the person living with it, whether you are the person who is caring for your child, and that there are absolutely exacerbations in times of acute stress, but the days when everything's going just great, we are still carrying the stress and the physical burden of that. And in saying that, I also want to recognize that our care team carries that too. I mean, that's something of being here for 19 years and knowing this team, I know that our team carries this every day as well. So because of that, we want to work together to make life better for all of us. And so what do we do? Since we started, we've done many things. The transition guide that the pre-adolescent to adolescents go through every visit, that was something we helped to work with the team to create. Going off to college is a big transition for many people. What are the things you should consider? We had a workshop about that. We helped develop a infection control brochure. I always like to put that little picture up with the masks because this is a reminder of the power of partnership when we first came together, and now, of course, the pendulum has swung and more people and centers, everybody is required to wear masks. But before this was the case, do people remember the days when you cultured something, a specific something, then you wore the mask? So then that was your label. You knew that that kid had something. Well, now, we kept saying we would all feel more secure if everybody wore masks. And it was a great perspective to share with the team who were very sensitive that people would feel more awkward wearing the mask. to then have this shift in the perspective. So let's see. Oh, and that binder project, that was because Amy Baugh, our hyper-organized parent, oh my goodness, I aspire to be like you, brought this binder to council, and it spun into this project. Other projects, transition is a huge issue here from pediatric to the adult side. We have these long relationships with this team. It's, it's warm and fuzzy, and it's a little different on the adult side. It's a shift, and so we have really worked hard to create tools to prepare people for this transition, knowing that we can front load people before they move to the adult side, and hopefully then ongoing transition will be taking place on that side. We do try to mentor other parents, and we assist with, let's see, the website. Show of hands, who here has gone to the CF Center website? Okay, if you don't work here. How many people? That's okay, but it's not great. And that is a resource. The other thing, the Facebook page, to the CF Center Facebook page, anybody go there? Okay, well, I would encourage people when you go home to look that up, because obviously a website is a more hard and fast thing. It is updated from time to time, but the Facebook is where we can have that little glimpse of community and share updates, and people can send things in, and Kathy is amazing about posting news on the Facebook page, so I encourage everybody to go there. Oh my gosh, I can see my timer, I gotta hurry. So we do monitor the website for content to add things to it. Other projects we're looking at are addressing the needs of our Spanish-speaking patients here. Obviously, it is a very hard disease to figure out when you first receive that devastating diagnosis and all that goes with it. Imagine trying to navigate if English is your second language. Very challenging. And then we're also trying to pay attention to further support services for newly diagnosed families, because I will say, we're kind of aging out on our council. We need to have some parental input from parents whose kids are newly diagnosed. So I'll move on through here if there's anything else. Oh, seeking solutions for improved care and communication between service lines. I just want to highlight this, that it's not just our own clinic. Obviously, we know there are many issues that come up when you have CF that are not just lung related. And so sometimes there are other service lines that have projects going on that do impact our community, and we have a relationship with family-centered care. Infection control, we actually just had somebody come to talk to us about issues about gowning and masking. So we are involved in the process with the care team. Finally, we are just a little group of people, and you have to jump through so many hoops to be on this council, and our numbers are limited by budget, etc. But we don't want to ever pretend that we are representing everybody, because everybody's experiences are very unique. And in particular, like right now, we don't have any parents on the council whose children are recently diagnosed. We want to make it easy for people to give us our feedback, and then rather than have you jump all those hoops, we are exploring ways to get your name and your email address. And if we have an issue and we know it's something you are interested in, we can maybe Skype with you during the meeting, or you could email in your input before, or we could conference call. We want to be creative because we want to bring you into the room with us, even if you physically cannot be there. So please, please come by the table and fill out a little form with your name and your email address, and we will move forward. Thank you, and any questions? No, okay, thank you.
Okay, before I get started, I did want to mention I am a big proponent of research, as was mentioned before. I've been doing research for about 10 years, and I think I've benefited from it quite a bit. And I do work full-time, so I have been able to fit in my schedule. So it really is something you should consider. So my name is Brian Eddy. I'm an adult CF patient. I'm going to talk very briefly about the Adult CF Advisory Council. The purpose, well, the group itself is comprised mainly of adult people with CF, and we also have members whose lives have been affected by CF, maybe a relative, or maybe just, at some point in their life they've been touched by somebody with CF, and so they want to get involved. So the primary goal is really just to improve the healthcare experience for the CF patient, and also the people who are helping that CF patient, like caregivers or anybody playing a support role. So a combination of these things eventually then we hope to actually improve the quality of health care that patient is going to receive. From a partner perspective, obviously the biggest partner would be the CF clinic, but we don't limit ourselves to that because we also know there's things such as inpatient hospitalization, stuff like that, that's very important. So we have to be able to touch on all those areas. A key partner, which I would assume is the same for the pediatrics, is the patient and community engagement organization within Stanford, who are really promoting a lot of these concepts to really try to make more of a holistic approach to healthcare. So they're a valued partner for us also. And I think, at least from my understanding, I just recently took the chair of the group, so I'm still kind of getting involved, but I'm pretty sure there's very few adult centers in the U.S. that have a similar concept as this advisory council. And even within Stanford, I think there's only maybe 8 councils. So the CF group is really kind of cutting edge here. We're really kind of pushing the boundaries. So it'd be great, to get more participation. And the key to this is that we are very open. We publish our minutes, we publish the agenda. Anybody can call into a meeting, and we're going to try to get a little bit more open about that and promoting access in the near future. So there is some online content that you may have seen that you might have accidentally got to from a CF Center link somewhere. But we do post our agenda there, and again, you can get the minutes. Basically, if you do a quick search for ACFAC and Stanford, you'll see a bunch of links that's going to come up. I'm talking about the agenda. I think in March, we always meet on the 3rd Wednesday of every month. I think we're going to have a pretty interesting agenda because we're going to talk we're going to have someone come in from that patient and community engagement group come in and talk about the real goals and how we can try to energize the group. And we're going to try to get one of the research assistants to come in and give us a quick update on what's going on too. So that's kind of just trying to get traffic, get people more interested in the discussions. From a project's perspective, they align closely with what you see in the pediatrics side. We've had very simple projects, which is simply, putting up some card that says, assistance for CFRD or something like that. We're also trying to get to some more visionary projects. And the one we're working on now is getting access to information for a patient. You may be familiar with My Health at Stanford. Well, you go there and there's some information, but you could certainly envision some great information that should be available for a CF patient. And so we've come up with a mock-up of the type of information that should be available. And the goal would be that we want the doctors to see that information too, because we want a very nice summary so that as soon as they look at that one quick glance, they don't have to go to 5 reports to see what's going on, a quick summary. So that we feel that's a very important project that we're working on right now. And as Meg mentioned earlier, we do have a Facebook page. So again, as she said, it's just a great place to share experiences, ask questions, or just vent. Because there are simply patients there, some forums you have to worry about if you vent, someone's going to come in and tell you you're wrong or that you shouldn't feel that way. You don't have to worry about that at this Facebook page. People are just going to, understand. They're going to have empathy as far as the issues. Another advantage for us is the fact that this gives us another avenue to collect information. So, the project I just mentioned about, what kind of information do you want to see if you could go to a single web page that had all your health information? So I just posted that to Facebook, and I get a bunch of responses saying, well, why don't we ever have this information? Why can't I see this? So it's a great way to collect information. And I think that's about it.
Thank you, Brian. That was wonderful. I went to congratulate both advisory boards for their resilience. You know, sometimes we thin out a little, sometimes we grow up in members, numbers, and activity, and I think both groups have been tremendous in helping us, again, keep in close touch and reach out to those that don't necessarily have easy access to the center. To try to catch up with time, I'm really not going to put any slides up for my piece, which was very brief, and is basically our report card as a center. As you very well know, thanks to the CF Foundation and the CF Registry, we keep a very close eye on the trends, on the different outcomes in patients with CF year by year, both at a national level and also at a center level and a regional level. And most of this information you can find summarized on the CF Foundation website. And if you're geeky enough and have some free time on a rainy day, you could really get the statistics of every single center in the country and compare them and come up with a little bit of a consumer report type of approach and see who's at the top, who's at the bottom, and things like that. But the main idea with this is just to see as a center how we're doing when it comes to not just providing the right services, but also how we are improving on the health outcomes on very specific groups on our patient population. And in your handbook is our report card. It used to be half a page, and as you see, year by year, we're adding more and more detail to it. And I'm very happy to be totally transparent and share with you all the information that is pretty much giving you a good snapshot of what we're doing as a center in comparison with the national goals and the national averages. And I'm very glad to report that, you know, year by year we've been making very steady movement, not just to reach the national average, but for most parameters be above the national average. And on certain things, we're certainly very close, if not at the top 10 when it comes to outcomes. Things like, for example, pulmonary function results on the 30-year-old and older CF patient population, we are on that top 10 center, which is tremendous because that's obviously one of the stages of the CF lung disease where you can have the most difficulty. And also we've made very steady progress in the nutritional markers. I think when it comes to the nutritional status of our patients across the different age groups, we're very much now above the national benchmarks, and that's also a tremendous achievement, which, you know, hasn't happened overnight. You know, this has really been steady progress, and again, if you go to the website, you can get graphs that will show you how this has been changing year by year. It's taken us truly, the whole team has put a lot of effort on this, and it's taken over 5 years to get that steady improvement, which is the most rewarding thing, regardless of where we're sitting when it comes to the national rankings. It's the fact that we're making that steady progress towards better and better outcomes. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that when it comes to the thing that we worry about the most, which is infection, again, we're very OCD about it, and we keep a very close eye on it. And not just in terms of, you know, the infection control and the prevention, but also, as you know, the world is changing when it comes to CF, and we know that the infections that we see nowadays are not necessarily the same that we used to see 20 years ago when I was a resident and first became interested in CF. There are many complicated germs that you know, have funny names and have very different ways of affecting patients and responding to antibiotics, and we're keeping a really close eye on that. And I'm glad to report that we're not really seeing any worrisome trends when it comes to the occurrence of these resistant infections. We still are staying below the national average and with fairly low incidence for some of these difficult germs. And that's a nice segue into our next presentation, because I think, you know, we need to be able to keep making steady progress and towards a cure for CF. We also need to get a better understanding as to different aspects of the disease, and particularly on the pulmonary disease, and it's the aspect of infection. And I think, you know, we really need to start thinking more about how we're going to make the best use of the 21st century tools, because every report that we see about CF infection is based on using the old paradigms of how we, you know, assess for infection and how we treat those infections. You know, the way that we do the cultures is still the same way that used to be done in the late 19th century. So we're still using old tools, again, to try to understand how we move forward in the 21st century. So I'm very happy to introduce my good friend and colleague and boss, David Cornfield, who is going to give us an overview of how we're using these very novel tools to, again, try to bring or align CF with the 21st century when it comes to understanding infections. So David.
Thank you, Carlos. Thanks to everyone for coming today, and thanks especially to the staff that have arranged this day with painstaking attention to detail over the past many months and perhaps even a year. So that's really wonderful. It's a great turnout today. I'm really happy to see everyone here, and I'm really happy to know of all the people attending via the web as well. One thing I wanted to just mention relative to Dr. Milla's comments prior to launching into this talk about a new paradigm for germs is to consider that, to underscore Carlos's comments about it's not really how we compare relative to other centers in the nation, but really how we compare year over year to ourselves, and to recognize that we've made steady and sustained progress, and we're getting better each year by all these parameters when we look at ourselves as the comparator group. I'm not trying to apologize for where we're at, because I think we're at a really excellent place, and there's been wonderful growth in the center in any number of parameters. But it is very clear that the kind of care that we deliver and the patient population that we serve, both as a result of being in California and also in being a heavily in an area that's heavily subscribed by managed care, has changed the population of our CF Center in ways that really make us best compared to ourselves year over year. So with that, I'd like to really just give a hearty congratulations to all the caregivers who are dedicated to our CF Center, from the people who are at the reception area to the folks who are running the center. So congratulations to you all. So as Carlos mentioned, there are new ways to look at microbacterial colonization and bacteria in general. And so I'd like to really try to argue for a very novel paradigm that is highly controversial and likely not even to be correct, but at least we'll put it out there and see how it goes. I think there's probably significant parts of what I'm going to say that are quite different than what you've heard about in the past. So this is sort of a cartoon or a model of the biological diversity that exists relative to microbes in our environment. And you can see this is broken up into three fundamental categories: the bacteria, the archaea, and eukaryota. And there is a remarkable amount of genetic diversity that occurs in all these different areas, and especially as it occurs relative to microbes. Now, there is a lot of diversity that exists genetically in all these different microbial communities, but it is also true that we have been using tools to evaluate germs or microbes that are really well over 100 years old. And in fact, it has become increasingly apparent that the tools that we have used have provided us access to only a vanishingly small percentage of the actual microbes. For example, what we can grow in the lab probably represents only about 1% of all the microbes that we can clearly identify as microbes. So using these tools where we use agar plates and grow these microbes really constrains the playing field relative to how many microbes and what these microbes might actually be. It's also very clear that that's relative to all the microbes in the world. There are also microbes that exist with human beings as well. And the overwhelming majority of the bugs that we sort of interact with, inhabit our bodies, are travelers on our persons, have not been cultivated in the lab as well. So this begs the question of, can we use scientific techniques to get at this idea of maybe there are other ways to study these microbes? And to that end, we thought that perhaps it would be really helpful to think about CF from a bit different perspective. So it is pretty clear, as you all in this room are well aware, that cystic fibrosis has been a study of different bacteria and how they interact with each human being. And we get these bacteria from different parts of the lung, and you can see from the cartoon that's up there, there's bacteria that we get from the larynx. There are some that we have people cough up by sputum. There's some that really are more distal in the lung. There are times, I'm sure that you guys are familiar with, when some of your providers have said, we're not quite confident of the results we're getting from the sputum, and it might be necessary to perform a bronchoscopy to get a better sample of what might be causing disease deep in the lung. And as you all know, sometimes these diagnostic strategies are very successful, and they result in the identification of a single microbe that we can then treat in the laboratory and affect a significant enhancement of health. But sometimes that's not really the case. And we have compromise in things like the mucociliary clearance, as I'm sure you heard Dr. Donaldson talk about this morning, and also some persistence of bacteria that create problems in the lungs because they form films that are not really accessible to the traditional antibiotics that we use. So people have begun to look at how these communities of organisms in the lung might really exist, and have used techniques that get at the genetics of the bacteria. So as opposed to growing these bacteria in the laboratory and put them on agar plates, they're broken up into small molecular fragments, and each of these fragments is then is sequenced and identified, and then put back together with a computer model so that we can know the identity from a molecular perspective of these bacteria or these organisms. And this provides us with a window to the microbiome, the whole kind of rainforest of bacteria that might actually exist. So it prompted us to ask the question of what might be the impact of all these organisms. Here I include a slide that really represents kind of the traditional approach to the microbial communities in the lung. And this is taken from the CF Foundation 2012 report. And on the x-axis, horizontally moving across, are different ages of patients. And on the y-axis is the percent of patients with cystic fibrosis who have a particular organism. And I think you can appreciate, for example, if you look at the kind of bluish, greenish slide or line that demonstrates Pseudomonas aeruginosa, relatively not that well expressed or not that frequent in kids less than 2 years of age. But by the time really you're entering your 20s, a good 70 or 80% of the CF population has Pseudomonas aeruginosa. You can also see, for example, that there are other organisms that we've heard about already today, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, Achromobacter, Burkholderia cepacia, Staph aureus, that are the traditional players relative to cystic fibrosis. And for really, since cystic fibrosis has been a disease entity that's appeared in the medical literature really since about the 1950s, we've really designed therapy to address these particular pathogens as much as possible. And this is sort of the paradigm that we have for pulmonary infection, that there are healthy lungs, and we recognize that generally speaking, there's probably some bacteria that are in the CF lungs that are early in life that are relatively benign, and that over time, some of these new pathogens, as demonstrated by the red bullae that come into these lungs, invade and cause significant disease. and the pulmonary exacerbations that we're all too familiar with dealing. Now, we suggest that perhaps there is nothing known about the microbiome of the lung. This is a quote that I took from a relatively recently funded application to the National Institutes of Health that said the presence of the lung microbiome in normal individuals has yet to be established conclusively. I think that for many of you, you operate under the notion that lungs are sterile. And I think, just yesterday we were in a research seminar, and one of the attendees at Stanford research seminar proclaimed that the lungs are normally a sterile organ. This is really not the case. It's not the case in healthy individuals, and it's not the case in CF-affected individuals as well. So that leads to the question of whether or not there's kind of a healthy microbiome or a microbial community that exists in the normal lungs, and whether this is somehow different, distinctly so, in patients with cystic fibrosis. And you can see in the in your left side of this cartoon, where we have kind of the blue lungs of some healthy individuals, and with a little bit different ecology based on these representative organisms I've inserted there. And it kind of led to a couple of fundamental questions. So first, does a healthy pulmonary microbiome exist? So is there a signature, so to speak, for healthy individuals? And we know that you take samples, healthy people will blow out sputum, and those will be culture negative. But is that really a representation of what's truly in the lung, knowing that we can only culture less than 1% of the microbes that we know exist in the world? So maybe we're really missing a significant number of pathogens with the current techniques. And we also know that in this Human Microbiome Project, which is a significant initiative at the NIH, really there was no emphasis placed on pulmonary sampling. So are we really missing a major issue relative to lung health and lung biology? So we initiated a collaboration with really one of the very notable scientists at Stanford, a gentleman named Steve Quake, who has the ability to measure all manner of substances at a single cell level and even at a single molecule level. And Carlos and I initiated this collaboration with Steve Quake and Paul Blaney, a postdoc in his lab. And we undertook evaluating the pulmonary microbial population using a molecular strategy, where we would identify the microbes not based on what we could grow in the laboratory, but based on the molecules that comprise or that are the signature of these particular organisms. And we used a technique called deep pyrosequencing, and we were able to break them up in a way that really led to very discrete and certain identification of these microbes. And we were able to control for the amount of protein that was there. And we got samples from sputum from 9 healthy individuals and from 16 CF individuals. And as you can see, the table 1 there demonstrates that we had patients who were about 28 years old. 10 of them were men and 6 of them were women. And they had relatively well-preserved lung function. Their functional forced vital capacity was 86%. Their forced expiratory volume in 1 second was about 72% predicted. And we were able to look at their genotype relative to whether they were delta-delta or not. And we also were able to look at their sweat chloride values as well. And the methodology we used was we extracted the DNA. We used the PCR analysis to really evaluate what the actual identity was of these organisms. We were able to quantify, and then we were able to look at these sequences in a way that allowed us to believe or disbelieve the veracity of each of those. And we found that there were some substantial surprises here. So, for example, now we're going to look at these bacteria under broad categories called phylum. And here you can see that the CF cohort, as represented by this pie chart, was not dominated by pathogens that are generally culturable. So the proteobacteria, which is kind of in the greenish, dark green section of that pie chart, represents the bacteria that we would have really expected to find dominant in CF patients. It's 28-year-old CF patients. So those would fall under the category of Pseudomonas or Haemophilus or Burkholderia. And you can see that there is greater than 50% of the organisms that were identified were something that you've probably never heard of, Firmicutes. Now, when we looked at this in contradistinction to our control population, I think you can appreciate that the colors and the relative presence of these different organisms were quite different between cystic fibrosis patients and the control patients. And I think some of the most substantial differences existed in the level of these bacteroides. So, for example, the control patients had about 16% of all of the organisms found were bacteroides, whereas the CF patients had only 3%. In contrast, in the control individuals, bacteria that fell under the Acinetobacter umbrella were only about 6% in the controls, yet about 25% in the CF populations. And so this led to a very interesting observation that it seems that the healthy individuals, and you can see by the color representations, had a more diverse sort of pulmonary microbiome, or the species in the rainforest, so to speak, of the microbes of the lung of the patients with control patients had a much more diverse population. And the control patients seemed to be much more enriched for the bacteroides, and the CF patients seemed to have a lot more Acinetobacter in their airways as well. And when we looked at this using a very complex algorithm to try to assess diversity, I think you can appreciate that using these relatively sophisticated statistical models, that the amount of diversity that was present, as demonstrated in the blue bars, was dramatically greater for the patients with, who were controlled relative to cystic fibrosis patients, arguing again that the relative diversity, the species, the sort of variety that was present was much more narrow in the cystic fibrosis patients than in the patients who were controls. And interestingly to us, and we came at this without any hypotheses. This was the sort of research that one should never do. That we basically undertook this with an unbiased, this was thought to have been a hypothesis-generating exercise. But what we found was, I think, quite interesting. And of the interesting aspects, we identified a set of bacteria that have never been cultured before, and you can't really culture them in the lab, and Paul Blaney termed them dark matter. And the dark matter index in healthy controls was, and you can see that's in the left-hand panel, was significantly greater than in the cystic fibrosis patients. So suggesting that there's a whole lot of background bugs that exist in lungs. And it posed the question of maybe this background bug population somehow was correlated with lung health. And it's not crazy, right? This is what people do when they try to repopulate bowel flora. This is what people do when they try to take, crazy amounts of yogurt to make sure that their colonic flora seems to be healthy. And it posed that sort of a notion for us as well. And because we were working with physicists, Doctors Blaney and Quake are physicists, we were able to subject this to the kind of mathematical scrutiny that us poor pulmonologists would never really be able to get to. And we looked at this from a personal perspective relative to each person's own sort of microbial signature. And in this slide, you can see on the right, there are the control populations. And the y-axis is the percentage of microbial sequences, which is a metric for different organisms. And I think you can appreciate that in the control population, there was a lot of different microbial communities that were represented, but they weren't represented in huge number. And I think you can appreciate, too, that in the CF population, and this is all the patients that we had, there was actually a lot more of specific microbial signatures, but with less diversity. So how do we really look at that? Well, one of the ways of evaluating that is a principal component analysis, and it gives a representation of how you can look at inter-individual variability, and it transforms this very textured, high-dimensional data into a set of 3 coordinates. And here you can see on this slide the principal component analysis of the microbial family abundances. And I think you can appreciate the blue splotches, so to speak, are from the control populations. And they're very distinct. They're each different patient. And I think you can appreciate that each of those control patients has almost a different signature. They seem to be almost distinct, right? You can see control 1, control 2, control 3. Whereas if you look at the CF principal components analysis, they're distributed one on top of another. You can't really distinguish how they really look. And so I think that led to the notion that the microbiome of the CF population has a signature, but it doesn't have a tremendous amount of inter-individual variation. The healthy subjects seem to have more diversity, and they have a much more specific signature one to another. And when you begin to look at this from a notion of what's really present, I think you can appreciate that what's really present is quite different between the CF patients and from the control patients. Moreover, if you look at with the patients, the dark matter index seems to be significantly less in the families of the cultured CF patients, and you can appreciate those. Now they're starred. And there's also the CF, we have also starred in the yellow stars sort of the pathogens that are traditionally associated with known CF pathogens. So this led to, I think, clearly the idea that the diversity in the CF patients is less. There are more bugs that are associated with CF, and there's a lot less bugs that have not been classified ever before. So this led us to wonder whether or not this was the disease itself or antibiotic treatment. And in this population, there was considerable antibiotic pretreatment, as I think you could all expect for patients who are 28 years old. But what we also noted was that we were able to look at inflammatory markers. And what we found was that in the patients with cystic fibrosis, when we looked at it by age, it seemed that the individual microbial diversity was decreasing over time. And it also seemed that in our adult population, the greater the diversity, the lesser the inflammation, or the decreased diversity, the greater the inflammation. So that by having a lot more diverse pathogens, you're able to decrease inflammation as well. And the healthy volunteers certainly had a much more diverse microbiome than the patients with cystic fibrosis. So, in summary, it seems to be, at least from my perspective, relatively inarguable. It's too bad Scott's not here any longer, Dr. Donaldson, because I think he would argue with me, that we each have a complex and personal pulmonary microbiome. And there is this biological dark matter that's not been classified by traditional microbial techniques that's abundant in healthy and CF patients. But it's clear that the dark matter is more present or more abundant in healthier control patients than in cystic fibrosis patients. There seems to be relative clarity that there is a specific signature among cystic fibrosis patients that is characterized by relatively distinct differences in microbial diversity. And this begs the question of whether or not we ought be using different antimicrobials. And I think it also begs the very controversial question of whether or not we should be using probiotics in patients with cystic fibrosis. It may be the case that we can identify bacterial organisms that may promote lung health as opposed to eradicating so much bacteria. And that's not to say that we shouldn't treat people with antibiotics. I'm not making that argument at all. Antibiotics clearly save lives and they improve the health and well-being of people with cystic fibrosis. But I'm wondering if now we ought to be thinking about a way to be more surgical in our treatment with antibiotics. And it's also very clear that there is diversity, that the greater the diversity, the diminished amount of inflammation. And so finally, just think about future ways we might be considering this work. We've identified a species that is often overlooked in cystic fibrosis, which is the Rothia species. There seems to be a negative correlation between Rothia, so the more Rothia there is, the less Pseudomonas there seems to be. And we also know that both of these species can cause some biofilm production. So maybe there's some strategies we need to undertake where we can think about how Pseudomonas and Rothia might interact one with another in order to consider how best to mitigate the effects of chronic pseudomonal infection. So I thank you all very much, and I am all that's standing between you and lunch, I believe. I'd be happy to entertain any questions. Dr. Wine. You need the mic, Jeff.
Sorry. Does this, is this on? Does this method also allow you to see the copy number of the bacterial species?
Yeah, they can make relative numbers. It's not actually copy number, but it's read numbers of the different amount of PCR fragments you get. So you can do relative quantification as well.
And so how does that compare in the CF versus the non-CF in terms of copy numbers of, like, because Pseudomonas, as you know, is enormously high, or can be?
Well, there's a lot more of fewer organisms in the CF population. So the bugs that are there in dramatically more abundance, and there's relatively fewer of the different identity organisms in these patients. And so the way that we kind of think about it is, you know, if you have a rainforest that has almost infinite diversity and you bring in a species that outcompetes all the other organisms in there, you're going to end up with a much less healthy rainforest because the whole ecological diversity will be upset. And, you know, we've seen this ecologically. This is seen all over the globe. And it makes sense to me that you need some good players and maybe some bad players, and there needs to be almost a equilibrium that can be established. And I believe, and I think this fits with the paradigm of disease that we've been operating under for the last 50 years, that an organism can just massively reproduce and create all sorts of havoc. And it's clear to me, and I think everybody in this room, that we don't eradicate bacteria by treating for infection. We simply knock down the actual copy number, and then people are producing a little bit less sputum and they feel a little bit better, but there's still all kinds of bacteria in the lungs. And I'm very fascinated by the notion that maybe there are some bacteria that we ought be giving, and that would outcompete or at least prevent some of these very noxious gram-negative organisms that you all know too well from wreaking havoc and causing destruction of the lungs and bronchiectasis.
I had a couple questions. One is, I mentioned earlier that my daughter grew some germs from around the house on some agar plates, and you mentioned that some of the germs that you found in the lung with your PCR and the DNA analysis method don't show up on standard methods. So one question is everyone using like a standard agar plate everywhere in the world, or are there CF specific agar plates? Is there any research into finding something that looks like more like CF mucus or lungs or anything like that?
Well, I think the moral of the story is that these techniques that we're using are 100 years old. And I think we're missing the forest for the trees, so to speak.
Okay, so my follow-up question was how easy it is to do your method, which is a more modern method, more modern than the 150-year-old method. How do you sample the lungs? How do you go down to, I don't know how deep you go and how you do that? And then the follow-up studies that are done with it, it seems like the cost-benefit thing would...
So, there's lots of questions that I'll try to unpack one at a time that you just asked. One of which is, I think, leads to what the significance of this is. I mean, we can grow a lot of organisms or we can identify a lot of organisms, but I think functionally we really don't know what the significance of these all are. And I think functionally we know that if someone's growing Pseudomonas and we correlate that with disease, with increased cough, increased sputum production, I think every clinician and every parent and person with CF in the room would agree that that's a problem that warrants treatment. So it's putting the whole picture together, both the clinical and the microbial component. Relative to cost, I think the issue is we've learned in medicine that we can measure and determine all sorts of things, but what's the clinical utility of refining our knowledge? And that, I think, is a question that has yet to be answered. We can keep adding more diagnostic zeal and more knowledge, so to speak, but sometimes the payoff is not certain. Relative to what exists in the lung and what we found may not directly relate to your question, but one of the issues we had to address with people who reviewed the manuscript and prior to it being published was there was an assertion that what we had found with induced sputum couldn't really be relevant to the lung because it's wholly contaminated with oropharyngeal flora, which I found to be a kind of a ridiculous concern, although it's a concern that's shared by everyone. And I thought it was a little bit ridiculous because, right, what have we been using to treat people with CF for the last God knows how many years? Sputum. And in fact, as you guys all know, if you have ever had kids with CF, now we're really more than willing to take a throat swab and treat on the basis of the results of those throat swabs, which we think might be the similar what's in the lungs versus the throat. So we had the opportunity, actually, because of a protocol that Dr. Wine has, of getting the lungs of patients with cystic fibrosis who were undergoing lung transplantation. And so we were able to take the explanted lungs after they were removed prior to the healthy lungs being placed in the body and analyze the microbial communities of deep in the lung. So we were taking, sections of lung that you would never be able to get, in a real live person. And we found a dramatically high concordance between what the sputum was that people were coughing out and the amount of bacteria, the sort of bacteria, the diversity of the bacteria that were deep in the lungs. So that's a way of saying that I think that what we're doing is probably not so bad. We're really getting at the real problem, and but at the same time, I think that there is more to know. And I realize that really didn't answer your question.
That's pretty good, thanks.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. That was great. To close the morning session and before moving to lunch, I'd like to acknowledge once again all the support and help that we get for supporting organizations like CFRI and the CF Foundation. And I'd like to give each one a few minutes to bring us up to speed as to where they are and what are their thoughts for the future. So, Sue, if you...
I have to warn you, when I'm around computers and copy machines, they blow up. So get your safety glasses on. We'll see how this works. Thank you. I am Sue Landgraf. I'm the Executive Director for CFRI. We are a local, nonprofit, grassroots organization. I like to say that we're small in numbers. We have very few staff, but we are helped by an inordinate number of volunteers. They gave us 7,000 hours last year to help us provide our resources and supports to people living with CF. So the Stanford Education Day today epitomizes what CFRI is. Community for those living, and I have to move this, with CF. You are here today because you are seeking knowledge to help you and your loved ones navigate the challenging world that is living with CF. And you are here today to hear the latest CF updates from the esteemed medical professionals at Stanford and Lucille Packard Children's Hospital and Dr. Donaldson, who is here. And to meet a new community. Whether you are parents of a newly diagnosed child or infant or a newly diagnosed adult with CF, or whether you are family members of a child or an adult living with CF. We are here, CFRI is here to be your partner in living. We want to help you navigate this challenging world that is CF. And of course, in addition to us, it's imperative that you have your medical team, because without them, you will have problems. It's very important that you work with them and not just have a medical team. CFRI has a new logo, and it's up there. You can see it. We're very proud of it. Thank you, Siri. It symbolizes the foundation. It represents our endless commitment to providing education, research, awareness, and support to our beloved CF community, now and into the future. Our relationship with you knows no bounds. It is absolutely infinite. Now here we go. Let's see if we can do it. Slide 2. Whew. CFRI has been providing vital CF research, educational and personal support, and helping families with CF for nearly 40 years. Ann Robinson is here today. She is one of the director emeritus. She was a executive director for so many years, and she still continues to be involved. She's in the back row there. Carol Jenkins just retired in September. She was here for 11 years, and I took over in September. Over the years, we've grown. We have nationwide and global reach through our programs, our supports, and through the effects of our CF-funded research projects. We are proud that we are partners in living with the CF community. We do connect CF resources with community needs, and we continue to change as the needs of our community change. CFRI is not static. Neither is CF, which is why we responded via our phones and emails to nearly 10,000 inquiries last year. We provide resources, Siri, I love your smile. We provide resources for all ages. We'll continue to do so and be responsive to our community needs. And if you are just starting this challenging journey and need advice, please do not hesitate to contact us. There is no cure for CF, we know that, but we're getting closer. What we've heard today is very, very, very encouraging. We do want that cure. CFRI provides crucial grants to support cutting-edge CF research at universities and medical facilities throughout the U.S., including Stanford, Dr. Jeffrey Wine. I'll just mention your name. Last year, we funded 7 CF researchers. Our CF-funded research focuses on science to increase the knowledge about the basic defect of CF. It engages new and promising scientists in the field of CF, and it funds CF scientists that have years of valuable experience. That's critically important. We must do more, and we are. Through our new CF Research Challenge Fund, we hope to add an additional 3 to 4 CF research projects this year and next, and we are working toward a cure. CFRI provides timely, relevant information about CF. Our annual National Cystic Fibrosis Family Education Conference, which you can see on the screen, is in its 27th year this August, and we draw keynote CF speakers from around the country. Plus, our CF-funded researchers provide updates on their projects. Our CF Discovery series with presentations by CF experts are live streamed and archived on our website. Thank you to CFRI Live, Scott and Eric down there, David Suhu over here, and Mary Convento over here. We mail our CFRI community newsletter annually to over 42,000 homes, clinics, and organizations around the world. Each issue is filled with articles on education, research, inspirational stories, advocacy, and community events. We provide many other educational publications, including CF in the Classroom, both in English and in Spanish, to help meet your ongoing needs, and we have more community booklets in the work for this coming year. Our support of those living with CF never wavers. We realize that knowledge is power, knowledge is health, knowledge is to be shared, and that's why we're all here today. Our annual teen and adult retreat is conducted with stringent infection control guidelines that allow teens and adults with CF to join together in a safe and nurturing environment to learn more about living a joyful, educated, empowered life with CF, knowing that they do have to tailor their life, but they leave our retreat knowing that they can have dreams, hopes, aspiration, and goals. They learn to never give up. And please, all of you, I absolutely say never give up. And I just want to mention a quick story here. This is a collage of various people in the community, and our community is made up of all different types of people, as I've mentioned before. But I want to talk specifically about a little girl who was diagnosed at 22 months of age with CF. Because at that time, there was no CF newborn screening. That family was completely devastated, but they never gave up. They instilled in their daughter the will to live, to fight, to enjoy life, to have dreams and goals. Her life was torn apart at age 12 when she unexpectedly suffered liver failure. Her parents were told on Mother's Day that their daughter had only 3 days to live, that they held on to hope. And their daughter received a successful liver transplant here at Stanford nearly 17 years ago. Dr. Moss, Dr. Robertson, Dr. Berquist, Dr. Castillo, Marcia, and Dr. Escovill, her surgeon, never gave up. Neither did her team at Children's Hospital in Oakland. The little girl went home and eventually received a full academic scholarship to UC Berkeley, where she graduated with highest honors. She never gave up. And 10 years ago, she married her sweetheart, finding love and happiness. She is 29 years old. She has just about every issue an adult with CF can have. She never gives up. She works, she laughs, she loves, she doesn't give up. I do not give up. I am her mother, and I have lived this road with her. I've lived this challenging road. I know what it's like for people with CF and their families to have these totally dark days, wonder if you're ever going to get out of them, and eventually you do. Please don't give up. And you need help, come to us. You need a partner, come to us. This is not a disease that you can live with alone. You need your medical team, you need your support team, you need your friends, you need your loved ones, because there are dark days, but there are joyful days. And I would not trade a day with my daughter for anything. We've been through it together, we'll continue to go through it together, and today she's being seen by the adult team at Stanford. She has wonderful doctors, and Dr. Moabir, Dr. Dillon, Meg, Cammie, Elika. I cannot say thank you enough, and I urge you all to get involved with us. If we can help you, that's what we want to do. We want you to be part of our community. We are part of you. We exist together. Together we can find that cure. Together we can walk this road, and I would be honored to have you call us, to be in contact with us if you want to volunteer and help us provide the resources to the community. We would welcome your involvement. And to all of you who are here today living with CF or have a child with CF or a relative with CF. I applaud you for coming today. I applaud the staff here today. Together, this is a journey that's difficult, but together we can all walk it and make a difference. And thank you very much for having me. And this has been a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. That was wonderful. Last but not least, I'd like to invite our colleagues from the CF Foundation. I briefly mention while we switch slides that I had the privilege and the wonderful opportunity of joining the chapter on their annual meeting a couple nights ago. And I can tell it's a highly energetic team in place, and we heard wonderful news about programs that are upcoming, and it's across the board. You know, it's not just funding research and finding cures, but it's also giving all the support across the board, including upcoming changes in terms of the support, the program for support for the families. So, Meg, if you will.
Technology fun. Okay, thank you. I've had a wonderful opportunity to get to meet many of you, but I have not met all of you. So my name is Megan Dennis, and I'm the Associate Executive Director at the Northern California Chapter for Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And first of all, I just want to start by saying thank you very much for inviting us to be a part of this day and to have the opportunity to get to know you a little bit more and kind of let you know where the foundation is headed for 2014. We have a very, very positive, hopeful outlook for 2014, and there's a lot of great directions that the foundation is moving into. So I just wanted to cover a couple of those with you, just to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at. I apologize for those of you who were able to attend our annual meeting. I'm going to share a couple of the slides we shared on Thursday evening, because I think it's important for you guys to know what we're looking at and what we're headed towards. So with all the changes in medical advancements and the clinical trials that have happened and are continuing to happen, the CF Foundation is going to be undergoing a big change, and even our mission statement is changing. And it's a lot more hopeful. It's a lot more positive. Well, not that it wasn't positive before, but it's encapsulating a lot more areas that maybe we weren't able to look into before. This is not yet published on the website, but it will be coming towards the spring. And so I wanted to give you guys just a little sneak peek on what we're looking at. One of the biggest pushes for us this coming year is that special access to specialized quality care and kind of that individualized treatment, because that is what we're needing, especially listening to these clinical updates with regards to what about my kid, what about me, what about my mutation, what about my symptoms. So we want to make sure that we are addressing those for everyone in the community. These are our biggest priorities for 2014. First of all is continuing our research. Research is, I'm sorry, this is really, really tiny, so I'm going to peek. Okay, good. I just want to make sure it was all in the right order. So the pipeline of our research has never stopped. We have drugs in clinical trials currently. We have drugs in the pipeline in all different areas of the stages of their research, whether in phase 1, phase 2, whether they're completed, whether they're being presented for further investigation. We don't stop. And as it was mentioned earlier, it's not just about let's find 1 or 2 drugs. It's about let's find a drug for everyone. Adherence. Adherence is a big challenge for a lot of people in the cystic fibrosis community. As you guys know, cystic fibrosis drugs are not cheap. The ivacaftor drug, now known as Kalydeco, I'll give you a little ballpark. Does anybody have any idea what a month worth of Kalydeco costs? $25,000. My car doesn't even cost that much. And absolutely, 98% of our patients have some sort of insurance coverage, but what's your copay on $25,000? It's unbelievable. So the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is working very, very diligently to make sure that if you qualify for that drug, we're going to make sure that you get it, period. So our communication, or access to quality of care. As many of you know, Stanford is, of course, one of our accredited care centers, but we have a specific standard of, specific standards in which every care center has to meet in order to be affiliated with the foundation. We want to make sure it is the highest quality care possible. So we have our team going into these care centers, and we do have care centers waitlisted to be a part of our network because we are keeping the standard of care at a specific level for every care center affiliated. We want to make sure it is the highest possible for you and for your kids. Our communications, I'll be a little brief because now officially I am the only thing standing between you and lunch. We want to make sure that the communications are going to be very, very clear and very, very understandable. Let's see here, revenue. Fundraising is an interesting beast, no matter how that happens. And so our goals with revenue continue to be the same. We're not going to keep things static. They're always going up. Our goals increase every single year, regardless of how we get there. We have to get there because I'm sure you've all heard the quote, money buys science and science buys life. Okay, and lastly, the Adult Task Force. So Cystic Fibrosis Foundation went through a very interesting time over the last 18 months. We put together this very elite task force, based on everything, whether that was clinical trials and research, medical care. We brought together CF families and parents. We brought together marketers. Basically, we were doing a full-on overhaul of the foundation in general to make sure that we're providing not only quality in the research, but again, quality in the care and patient communication / support. So one of the biggest things we have rolled out is that the Patient Resource Center. The Patient Resource Center is fairly new, and it continues to get beefed up. So you'll see there's a lot of information that we're currently making available and continue to make available and make it very easy for people to understand. When you visit the cff.org website now and you find the link to the Patient Resource Center, there's also a library. We're going to break down what those things look like for you guys. We have a legal hotline with free access to our legal team. So we've got a bunch of lawyers on standby who will help with anything from your taxes to how do I get the medications that I need and how do I work with my insurance company. So we want to make sure that we are breaking down those barriers because no one who qualifies for some sort of care should be denied because of a financial need or because of a roadblock put up by an insurance company. So we're there to help no matter what. I'll let you kind of take a look at this, but one things I did want to point out is that case management, we want to make that individualized, and that has been it's always been on our to-do. We've always had that element there, but now it's even more. So I encourage you guys to take a look at the website and some of the changes that we're seeing for 2014. I think 2014 is going to be an extremely exciting year, not only fundraising-wise. We have a very strong team in the office, and as Dr. Milla hinted towards, extremely energetic. I mean, there's tons of great energy and wonderful compassion in the team. And so I just wanted to let you guys know that thank you for putting your trust in us and allowing us to be friends of yours. And thank you for, again, inviting us today and allowing us to be part of this day.
Thank you, Megan. Okay, we're going to break for lunch. We'll reconvene at 1 o'clock to give you enough time to stretch your legs and enjoy your lunch. Please take everything with you because we're going to reshuffle these rooms to get them rearranged for the afternoon sessions. The pediatric session will be on this room and the adult session across the hallway.
Adult here, pediatric on the other side, so just opposite. The cafe is open for seating because it's wet outside, so if you want to grab your lunches here and go in the cafe, which is just down the way on the left-hand side.